Thank you, Jan. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you this morning. And as someone who's just come back from Washington, D.C., I can tell you that continuity and change is probably a very understated way of describing the state of the world today. But let me start there because I think subject of India and great powers would lead us to look at the state of the great powers, the state of India, and the regional and global landscape. And in many ways, all of them are changing, and changing even by the relative standards of change over the last few decades. So we have really a situation where if every variable is in flux, I mean, imagine the fluidity, the uncertainty, and the possibilities of that world. Obviously, the immediate issue, which is in everybody's mind, are the foreign policy consequences of the U.S. election, and you know what is expected, and we are all sort of waiting to see how it unfolds, is that there will be a change in the terms of engagement between the United States and the world. It has been characterized in different ways, but I think exactly how that change would unfold, some outlines of it are clear from the nature of the election campaign and positions which not just the winning candidate took, but in terms of the systemic approaches to many key issues, including the TPP. But I think what can be safely predicted out of the United States is clearly that the Trump administration would have different priorities and, as I said, different terms for engaging the world. Now, it's interesting when I was listening to Jan's reference to the focus countries. Actually, the last few weeks have seen us being Government of India, engage those very focused countries. We had a visit by Prime Minister Theresa May, her first bilateral visit to Asia after the Brexit. We had both President Xi and President Putin in Goa for the BRICS, and we had our own Prime Minister's visit to Japan. So if you have followed those visits, that they in themselves indicate the nature of India's changing engagement with these great powers. Well, that's in a sense, I'm describing a process. I think underpinning it are important questions. I mean, they're not they're profound questions, but certainly fairly obvious questions. Really, what will be the future of Europe after Brexit? In terms of the unity of Europe, which we have taken for granted as a steadily deepening process year after year. If you sort of juxtapose that with what has happened in the United States, then a second question, which is what will be the nature of Western unity, and in fact, would there be continued Western unity on big global issues? In Asia, the obvious question, the implications of the growth of Chinese power for China itself, for China's relationships with other great powers and with the neighborhood. Then the pulls and pressures on Russia, post-Ukraine, Russia's involvement in the Middle East, and Russia's own relationships with different powers in Asia. And in the case of Japan, not just the TPP uncertainties, but really the issue of Japan that is debating the merits of assuming greater security responsibilities. And if you look at all of this, and then from an Indian perspective, really visualize sort of a more influential India, certainly a larger economy, a more active diplomacy, a greater commitment to connectivity and to regionalism in South Asia. I think you would really have the makings of a very interesting situation here. Now, as I said, with the happenings in Europe and United States, a big issue is whether we will see within the Western camp some degree of decoupling as compared to more traditional policies. And and many of us who really saw the Soviet era and the post-Soviet era, and then the stabilization of the post-Soviet era. Today, you have to really ask ourselves if Europe, in a sense, is regionally less strong than it was before, if the Western unity is less tight than it was before, if there's a greater fluidity in the international system, are we really looking at a profound change in the post-1945 system? And that, I believe, is a issue that Indian foreign policy has to confront. Now, it's not just at the great powers, though I know that is the focus of the discussion. I think we also need to look at the regional flux, and particularly for India, because you have, again, very significant developments happening in Southeast Asia, developments which are posing challenges, again, to the very continuous growth of a very successful regional organization, and how coherent the ASEAN would continue to be, and how it would rise to the challenges of its immediate periphery. Because bear in mind that the ASEAN in many ways sort of flowered in a low pressure environment, and as the neighboring pressures on ASEAN have grown, a lot of the postulates which underpin the ASEAN have come under stress. The second, of course, is the region to India's west, and I mean a little bit far west, which is really the Gulf and beyond, where you have very sharp contradictions among regional powers, and of course with the rise of ISIS, really a very sort of a challenge of a new kind which transcends Westphalian politics. The third regional, but in a sense bigger than regional issue I would flag in the same context is what is happening in the maritime space, because the maritime space too is today affected by the changes in the equations amongst the great powers, as well as the rise of China as a maritime power. So if you from India's perspective, it isn't only that the great powers are changing, the two big regional hubs on either side of India is changing, and the maritime spaces to the south of India are changing. So we are really moving to a much more dynamic, much more complex environment in which we address our foreign policy challenges. Now, in terms of the questions that it poses for Asia, before I come to India, I think one question which particularly impinges on our relationship with Europe is whether there is a degree of disengagement between Europe and Asia. Not economic disengagement, because clearly the world is becoming more integrated there, but really political, security and strategic disengagement. How concerned today is Europe about security developments in Asia? I think that is surely a question to ponder about, and I would here make a very sharp distinction between Europe and the United States. The second issue on which, as I said, the jury has not even assembled, leave alone given a verdict, is really what does the Trump administration mean? What does the Trump would it be an administration which, while stepping back from regional economic mechanisms, actually bilateralize a lot of its economic and trade investment dealings? Would it rebuild military capacities and would it actually address many of the challenges with a stronger resolve than we may have seen earlier? The third issue is the Russia-China equation, and I think if you look over a long period, and this is something which is even a pre-Second World War issue, the interplay between Russia and China has always had a very sort of profound impact on the rest of Asia. And even when it comes to India's own foreign policy, those of you who would be familiar with the makings of non-alignment and the calculations of the 50s and 60s would know how deeply that equation influenced Indian choices and approaches. In terms of the other issue, the Islamic radicalization and the rise of ISIS, again, I think while the focus till now has been the region west of Asia, we perhaps need to start thinking what implications this could have if the virus spreads more deeply into the region east of Asia, east of India. And I think if you see the salience of terrorism today as a foreign policy, national security issue, globally speaking, but particularly where India is concerned, I think there's a reason why it has sort of got the prominence that it has. Finally, I think the other big question for Asia are the economic uncertainties. Obviously, for countries in East Asia and Southeast Asia, the future of TPP is the big question. But I think there are larger issues. I think there are issues of offshoring, there are issues of outsourcing, there are issues of migration of people. There are concerns of trade and tariffs as well. So in a broader regional sense, I would suggest to you that the fluidity and the free play at the great power level has actually or is actually translating into greater uncertainties at the regional one. Now, when we look at Asia, I think there are a few points which are worth noting. One, of course, the obvious one, that it's a continent, a large region, which actually is far from evolving a security architecture. And in fact, you still have very sharp, I would even suggest sharper national rivalries than we have seen some years ago. And sort of a balance in the making. And a balance in the making is obviously has its own uncertainties and risks and contradictions. But this is still, at what speed we will get a balance, what kind of balance it would be. I think these are very open questions right now. Now, one reflection of this balance in the making is the connectivity competition, in a sense, that you see in Asia, where different countries are supporting different models and different initiatives of connectivity, because in many ways there's a realization that connectivity will shape not just the economic future of the continent, but also the political and strategic one. Where India is concerned, I think this raises a number of important questions. How do we push? One, how do we develop our own region much more intensively? Because lack of connectivity in South Asia is probably what is holding back South Asia and India's prospects. Two, how does India and South Asia fit into a larger Asian connectivity grid? Three, if there are multiple connectivity initiatives, how do we get the best out of a multiplicity of options? I mentioned the importance of the maritime spaces. I would also make the point that today the future of the maritime space is very much dependent on developments on the littoral countries. And in that sense, today, the ability of land to shape the ocean is much stronger than that of ocean to shape the land. And when we look, therefore, at the maritime activity, shaping it from the land is part of the connectivity debate that is going on. Now, this is, to my mind, the landscape which all of you need to consider. And the challenge, of course, for Indian diplomacy is how do you find optimal positioning? If you look at the great powers at which you are focused, but I would really think that without bringing in Europe, you don't get a rounded picture. I think between the United States, China, Russia, Japan, Europe, and I still use the word Europe despite Brexit, I think how does India position itself optimally? And we have the possibilities of doing so, because if you look at each one of these relationships, I would argue that each one of them has grown enormously in substance in the last decade. The challenge for us is a more, I would say, a cautious policy, one with less embrace of its risks, but therefore also a sort of a more tepid exploration of its possibilities, or one which is much more nimble, which looks for opportunities to take advantages to advance an agenda, and one where, because the inherent contradictions between us, between India and the other great powers, are today far less than they used to be. I think much greater possibilities of forging ahead in a fluid, if I can use a term which is very popular here, a very much more multipolar situation than in the past. Now, to my mind, an India which is prepared to engage the great powers more robustly, which has a much clearer sense of what its agenda is, and sees in that engagement the possibility of advancing its own great power prospects. I think we have to, for want of a better term, I would say, be all things to all men. That we have to engage a multiplicity of actors on a range of arenas, and try to straddle what can be contradictory pulls and pressures on our policy. Some of it would be longer term. I think there is, to my mind, a fundamental issue, which is we are not a beneficiary of the 1945 world order. We were not part of the decision making in 1945. And a lot of the global architecture is derived from 1945. So to the extent that the UN Security Council, the P5 issue gets addressed, I think that is a big revision. But it's and there's a P5 N5 connect as well. So how do you actually, in an increasingly fluid global situation, push for a revision where a big country, the world's second biggest by population currently, gets a better place in that order? I think that is a big question. There is a related question, which is that in many ways, India, being a liberal democracy, is a sort of a Western power in the East, but it's still not a Western power. And I think forums like the BRICS offer the possibility of finding common ground with countries like Russia and China on issues where the interests of India and of those countries may diverge from what till now was a relatively united Western bloc. At the same time, I think we have very strong converging interests with Western countries as well. You can see that in expressions of liberal democratic political values. You can also see that strategically in something like the joint strategic vision for Asia Pacific and the Indian Ocean that was announced last year with the United States. As I said, the old order needs to be addressed and ways of accommodation found. There are, the UNSC would be the pinnacle of that, but there are, different milestones, different expanding your regional presence, joining organizations like SCO. These are part of the upward climb for a country like India. I mentioned connectivity. I think it's really amazing how many connectivity initiatives there are today in the world. Big ones, little ones, regional, bilateral, and many of them are only now getting some prominence in our discourse. I mean, the International North-South Transport Corridor or the Ashgabat Agreement are probably initiatives that not many knew a few years ago. Now, having said that, I think it's equally important for us to sort of maintain and strengthen the capital that we have as a champion of the developing world. So on trade issues, on development issues, I mean, forums like WTO or occasions like the NAM, G77, I think it's important to sort of find new mechanisms without really letting go of what has worked for us in the past. And part of it is identity itself. I think to be a great power, it's important for India to develop a broader identity. And what we have seen again in the last few years is really a broadening out of the Indian strategic mind and of the Indian strategic self-perception. I think we see the Gulf and perhaps Malacca Straits as much more bound to us today than we did 10 years ago. This broadly is the situation I present to you. And I would again end on a note on which I began, which is when we look at the world, bear in mind this is actually been there for about 70 years. That's not such a long period in history. And there was a world before that. There will be a world after that. I think today the challenge for us debating the subject of India and great powers is really how do we use these relationships. I have, for want of time, because I'm sorry I came in a little late, stayed off a few subjects which are in my notes, but I chose not to address, which is particularly the leveraging of bilateral great power relationship, for example, between India and Japan, to advance our prospects. But I'd be happy to take questions on that. Thank you very much.